for video number 3. We're now moving from cakes to pies, and in particular today we are going to talk about pie dough. I'm going to walk you through the process, and if we're talking about pie dough, it generally consists of a ratio, okay, 3 to 1. That 3 is generally our flour, and that's AP flour. Secondly, that number 2 consists of our fat. So this could be butter, it could be margarine, it could be shortening, it could be lard. Okay, so it could also be a combination of that, which is what we're actually going to do today. And then that 1 represents the liquid, which is generally going to be water. Okay, so to get started, I've got our flour here that we're going to go ahead and add to our big bowl. And when it comes to mixing these things, I generally like to do this by hand because it's easy to stop. And if you're doing it in a mixer or a RoboCoupe or something like that, it generally tends to get overworked. Next, we are going to start with our fat. I'm going to do a combination. What we've got here is just some general Crisco, some vegetable shortening you can find at the grocery store. This is a cup of that shortening. Okay, so shortening there. I'm then going to go ahead and cover that shortening with our flour, and I'm going to just start to work that in by hand. Okay, again, by doing this by hand, you get literally a better feel for kind of what we're looking for when it comes to incorporating our fats. Okay, so now that we have incorporated our shortening, our part of our fat, okay, again, that was 1 cup of shortening, we should get kind of this what's called a mealy texture or a mealy dough, where you can see in there we've got kind of little pebbles of our shortening and that flour actually together. Okay, that's what we're actually wanting. Now again, we're incorporating 2 different fats. So we've got our shortening here, and then I've also got just general butter. And this is going to be, we've got 5 tablespoons of butter here. And what I want to do, again, I want to cut this into kind of small little pads of butter. I want to then incorporate that into our flour mixture. And again, we are going to do what is called cut in that fat. Now with our butter mixture, I do want larger chunks of butter, okay? The shortening there is to add really a good amount of texture, okay, light texture. And the butter there is to add some flavor. Again, there's a lot of different pie dough recipes out there. Some may have margarine in there, some may have lard, some may have butter. You can use whatever you want, or at least in this time, whatever you might have. All right, so now that we have added all of our fat in there, and we've mixed it, and we've made this mealy dough, we've cut our fat in. I've made a little well in the middle of my bowl, and I've added to that really cold water. Okay, and that was 5 tablespoons of water, 1 tablespoon of apple cider vinegar, and then also 1 egg, and then 1 egg white. Now the egg is there for a binder and really strengthen our pie dough, and the apple cider vinegar is there to just add a little more flavor, a little kind of contrast. So to that, I want to start to work our dough together and bring this to combine this together as a whole. Okay, and what we should start to get is a dough ball. So once we have combined this together, this is what we're looking for. It should form into a ball, no problem. Texture-wise, it should be the texture generally of a very soft and pliable Play-Doh. Now, we don't want to knead this or anything like that because we want this, we don't want to overwork this, okay? We want a nice light texture when it comes to our dough. So I'm going to transfer this back into our bowl here, and I'm going to let this rest for at least 20 minutes. All right, so it's been 20 minutes. We've let our pie dough rest. We've got everything cold again. Okay, that is kind of that what we actually want to do is everything needs to work in batches, and we need things to stay cold until we get to that baking time. So there's a lot of ways when you're rolling this dough out. I personally like to do it on parchment paper, and this is going to make things a little bit easier when it comes to the whole transfer method onto our pie pan. So I'm going to go ahead and give our parchment paper a good amount of flour, a good dusting, and then I'm going to take my dough, and I personally like to go ahead and press this out with my hands quite a bit before we actually get to any rolling. You might do the same thing with a pizza dough if you ever do that. Go ahead and add a decent amount of flour to the top of our dough, and then whatever rolling pin you're using, I've got two here. This is a general French rolling pin where it narrows out on the ends, and then if you have this at home, this will work perfectly fine as well. We've got both here. So also with our rolling pin, whatever one you're using, give it a good coat of flour, and then you're going to start this rolling process. Now remember that what we're looking for is we're looking for a circle. Now, does it have to be a perfect circle? No. So do your best in making it somewhat of a circle, because I can guarantee that your pie pan is pretty close, if not a circle. So I'm using my hand just to work this out, and it does take a little bit of time. If anything starts to get sticky, now I'm not to that point yet, but let's say our pie dough is starting to stick to our rolling pin. We're going to want to add a little bit of flour where maybe it was sticky on that dough, and that will help with it not being so sticky. So I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit because it's starting to get a little tacky. Now we don't want to overkill it with flour. We just want a little dusting. If we add too much flour, we're going to make our dough tough. Okay, we're adding gluten to it, and what we're looking for is a nice flaky crust. Now, depending on the size of your pie pan, that also depends on how thin or how thick you need to roll out your pie dough. So I've got our pie dough or pie pan here, and to easily kind of gauge how big you need to roll that out is I like to take my pie pan, put it on top of my dough, and what we're looking for is roughly about 1 to 2 inches that is overlapping, okay, or extra pie dough on the outside of our pan here. So we're pretty much to that point. Got a little spot right here. And that should be good. So why do we want a little extra? Because we have a pretty big lip here, and also we have to fill this area in as well. So again, I'm going to take my pie dough, I'm going to turn it, bring my pie pan over to my work area. I'm going to give it a little spray. This will just help that first piece when you cut it after you've baked it to come out. And then I'm going to go ahead and take my pie dough, and I'm just going to transfer this, okay? So I generally like to bring it here, set it on top, bring this over, and then just flip it on top of our pie pan. And then our parchment should very delicately pull away from our pie dough. Alright, so now you can see we've got all the way around, we've got a little extra overhanging, and now if we do not cut this and we bake this, it's going to bake, or excuse me, it's going to burn. But one thing we want to make sure is we want to fill in our our pie pan. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to take this outside edge, lift that up, and I'm placing my hand on the inside, and then very, very delicately, I'm just patting it, okay? Patting it into that little space and filling that space. Okay, again, lifting the outside edge up and then working that pie dough all the way in. You need to make sure you do that throughout the pie dough and all the way across our pie pan. So now we've done that, we then need to remove this outside, okay, or this outside extra pie dough that we've got. I think it's very, very easy to go ahead and lift this up and then just take a paring knife and then go with the pan and just cut that excess pie dough off. All right, so now that we've cut that off and we've got all the way around, we've got nice smooth edges and no overhang. With this extra pie dough, okay, if you want to make a really small pie, you can do that. All right, so now that we have got our pie dough ready, we need to flute our edges, okay? Now there's a couple ways you can do this. You could take a fork and just press around the whole way, and that would be perfectly fine. It doesn't look as good as the fluting. And the fluting, if you think about it, is very, very simple, okay? That is what's gonna give this really nice edge, and it's gonna get crisp and again, flaky. So I think the easiest way to do this, if we just take our knuckles here, okay, I'm taking my knuckles, I'm gonna just take my finger, and I'm gonna push in, okay? And then next, okay, we're gonna go where that one knuckle left off, and then continue this all the way around our pie dough, our pie pan. If ever your finger here gets starts to stick to our pie dough, what you can do is just take a little bit of flour and you can work that, and it should not. Now that we've fluted all of our edges on our pie, we now need to let this get cold again, okay? It's been at room temperature, we've worked it, we've rolled it out. We want to, again, make sure everything is nice and cold. So, pop this in your fridge for at least 20 to 30 minutes, let everything get nice and cold, and in the meantime, go ahead and preheat your oven for 450 degrees. So with our pie today, since we're doing actually a custard-based pie, we're actually going to do what is called a blind bake. Now you can do this in a couple different ways. You can poke the top of the dough, okay, and that's going to add or allow air to get in there. Or you can do what we did, and I just put some foil down over our pie, covered it all the way around, and I put some rice in there. Now, if you don't have like just regular uncooked rice, you could also do some dried beans, or they do have what's called pie weights. So once you've weighted down your pie, or add those pie weights or the beans or rice in that instance, we're going to blind bake our pie. Okay, the reason behind that is if we're using a custard-based pie, is we do not want our crust, that is, to be soggy. We want it to be flaky and have a nice kind of crunchy texture. So that is the reasoning behind blind baking. Now remember, it's just for a custard base. If you're wanting to do maybe an apple pie, it's not needed. Now that we've been able to blind bake our pie crust, we need to remove our foil and our rice. So I'm going to take with both my hands, take our rice and foil out. And I'm going to just discard this, the rice that is, to another bowl. You can still actually use that for future references. Now, for this, we need to put this back in our oven. We're going to bake it for another 5 to 7 minutes. Once this starts to set up and we start to get a little bit of color, not too much. Okay, so we've baked our pie dough an extra 5 or 7 minutes. I did 6 minutes, kind of just to be in between there. And again, that pie dough is going to start to set up. It's going to start to have a little bit of color, but not a lot, because we are still going to bake this, and that's where a lot of that browning is going to come from. So I've set this on a cooling rack. We're going to let this cool for probably about an hour to 2 hours until it's nice and cool, and then we can add our filling. Now that our pie dough has been able to cool down, now we have to fill it. So, because we did a blind bake on our pie crust, we are going to do a custard-based pie. So, one of the biggest pies in Indiana is called a sugar cream pie. I'm a big fan of it, not just because of taste, because it has ingredients that most likely you already have at home. So, I went ahead and prepared some of it already. In my pot here, I've got 1 cup of sugar, I've got 1 1/4 cup of cornstarch, and 2 cups of milk. I've brought that up to a boil, and after we boil it, we cook that for an extra 2 to 3 minutes. And what we should get is it should be nice and thick, and it should, just for a reference, stick to the back of a spoon. So, now to that, we're going to add our butter. Okay, this is a 1/2 cup of butter, which would be a whole stick. We're going to go ahead and whisk that in there. And then we're also going to add our vanilla. So again, very, very simple ingredients, things that most likely you already have at home. Now again, like I said, this is a really considered one of the well-known pies in Indiana. But again, there's a lot of different custards that you could easily add to this. In my opinion, the nice thing about pie is there are so many different varieties. So you can really make this crust and then add whatever you want. So now that our butter has been added and has melted into our base, I'm going to go ahead and pour this into our pie. And then on top of our pie, traditionally, we see cinnamon. So I'm going to take some cinnamon. I also have some freshly grated nutmeg. And I'm just going to sprinkle that over the top of our pie.